Welcome to Man About Danville with Logan H. Gurman, a podcast for Danville, Kentucky and beyond. Conversations with friends, and you get to listen. Brought to you by the Logan Company, a commercial and residential real estate brokerage for Danville and Central Kentucky. 80% Danville-centric, 20% eccentric.
Good morning, Danville, Kentucky. You are listening to Man About Danville. I am the man about Danville himself, Logan H. Gurman. You are listening to Danville's favorite podcast covering Danville, Boyle County, the Bluegrass region, and almost the entire Commonwealth of the state. Thank you so much for joining me, whether you are listening here in Danville, Perryville, Junction City, Lancaster, Liberty, Dunnville, Lexington, Louisville, Indy, Seattle, Portland, Atlanta, Denver, New York City, Nashville, Chattanooga, Memphis, Little Rock, or Boca Raton. I appreciate you taking part of your day and spending it with me. This is my summer reading edition. This is the third time I've done this one. This is episode 51. I've been at it for over 2 years. I have a very special guest joining me today, Dr. Milton Reigelman. Milton Reigelman served Centre College for more than 45 years and is credited with making Centre's Study Abroad program both a national success story and an indelible part of the Centre experience. If you traveled abroad with Centre, there's a good chance that Milton Reigelman planned or led your trip. He started at Centre College in 1971. He was a Cowan professor of English and was even the acting president in 1997 and 98. I am pleased to have him sitting here with me today. All right, Milton Reigelman, thank you for joining me on Danville's favorite podcast, Man About Danville.
Man About Danville.
Milton, you are something of a man about Danville yourself.
But wait a second. Man About Danville. Is this sexist? I mean, what about women about Danville? Or are you using man in the sort of plural sense to include...
In the greater collective?
The greater collective?
No, I'm just talking about me.
Aha.
I identify as the man about Danville, so it's my podcast. So
I got you, man.
Somebody could easily host
sure
whatever they feel about Danville, but for me, this is it.
Good. Okay. We can go on.
All right, then. So, Milton, you and I have gotten to know each other over the years. You and I are in Rotary together. Where all are you involved in this fair community?
Well, I don't know.
You're a retired professor of English from Centre.
I am. I guess two of the main things I do and like, one is the Sister Cities Commission, which I've been the chair of for too many years. Are you interested in taking over as chair of Sister Cities?
Not at the moment.
Okay, maybe tomorrow I'll ask. And the other is the Arts Center of the Bluegrass, which has become a real favorite of mine, only partly because it's run by Nikki Kincaid, but that is one reason. But we do all kinds of neat stuff, as you know. We've taken our trips to Louisville and Chicago and New York, and we just relatively recently got back from an art trip to London and Paris, and we're now planning one. It's been announced to see the immersive Van Gogh exhibit in Cincinnati, where we're going to have this fabulous lunch first in the Metropolitan Club, which is on the 19th floor of the tallest building on the Kentucky side, because if you're on the tallest building on the Ohio side, you can't see Cincinnati, right? You got to have some distance to have a view, and the view goes from downriver all across Cincinnati to upriver, where it flows to the south, I guess. Anyway, we have a limit of probably 40 because we're going to go on a bus up there. And so if you're interested, you better sign up because I think we're going to fill up pretty quickly.
You can get more information at the Art Center of the Bluegrass website, and I'll drop a link to that in the show notes.
Great, yeah.
When's that coming up?
It's going to be on Wednesday, July 20, I think it's 6. Okay, so there's time, but it was just announced and it's filling up, so register if you want to go.
So, and you recently got back from Paris and London, touring some museums over there, and then you were also...
Well, I was in Ireland. I do we lead alumni trips for Center College. Mother Center doth provide its alumni. And sometimes they're sister cities trips. This was to Ireland. As you may know, as I know you know, because your son, young Max, is going to be part of the first high school exchange with our sister city, Carrickfergus, Northern Ireland. And so we often will do sister cities trips to both the Republic and Northern Ireland, always our sister city, Carrickfergus.
I don't know whether he's more excited about his Irish excursion or whether I am, but the whole family is so excited for him to go visit there, and we're excited to have his exchange partner live with us for a week following, and it's just
great.
What an opportunity for these young kids that are going.
You should know that we have warned his exchange partner about you and Layla.
Well, fortunately for him, it's tobacco cutting season, so we'll be able to keep him busy all week.
You know, there are child labor laws that were passed in this country.
But he's Irish, so they won't apply, right?
Well, have him dig potatoes.
Yeah. You know, did you see the Irish potato famine documentary last night on PBS?
I did not.
It was 2 hours. It really.
Oh my!
If you like potato famines, all right. So, while you were still more closely associated with Center, you were also the director of the Travel Abroad program there.
Yes,
talk about that.
But it's not travel abroad; it's study abroad. Because there's a difference between traveling and studying. Traveling is great. I would do it every day of my life, you know. But that's different. You're a tourist, and you're living in a hotel, and you're going to tourist places. And they're tourist places because they're great to go to. Nothing against going to Versailles, for instance. But when you study abroad, you live there for 3 months or so. That the semester is what I like, at least. And then you get to kind of intuit some of the silent language of a culture. What is it that makes people happy? Well, it's different in different places. And what about the rhythm of the day? How much time do you spend eating meals? And what's that about? Is it about grabbing a Big Mac in the car with a milkshake and spilling the milkshake? Or is it about sitting down in a nice place with friends or family and taking for dinner about 2 hours? You know, restaurants in this country, I know this for a fact because one of my daughters used to work at one, and they had, what's that great Australian beef place, Outback? And she worked there until she sued them for some reason, and she had to get another job. Anyway, they trained you, and so the average person, the average party of two, you could get them out in 1 hour and 7 minutes or something like that. In France, for instance, they will only book one party at a table a night. It doesn't open till 7 o'clock. Okay. And so they close at 11. And so they wouldn't dare book another party at 9 or 9:30 because that wouldn't be enough time to savor each other and the food and ideas and art and music and everything like that. So study abroad is where it's at. So you were in charge of that program for a number of years. Correct.
Where are some of the most interesting places you were able to take students?
Probably we started in London because we had to convince students that it was safe, to go abroad. Then we went to Strasbourg in France, and that's our largest program still. Then we went to Merida, Mexico, which is in the Yucatan, way away from the drug routes, and it's much safer than Danville. There are 10 times as many murders in Danville, a county of 30,000, as there are in Merida, a city of 1 million. Okay. If you wanted your children to be safe, you would get them out of this country and send them to Merida, Mexico, not some other places that are dangerous. And then we went to Shanghai, which is pretty exotic still. And then we also have two exchanges with Japan, one in Yamaguchi, where Robert Shelkoff is from. Some of you know Robert. And one up in the north. And then we have, for intensive languages, we have a program in Germany, Regensburg. For Spain, you can do intensive in Merida, or you can go to Spain. So, in other words, we have a lot, and now more and more in this country that is off campus. There's one in Washington, now in New York, one in Lake Tahoe, and maybe soon one in Louisville, where you spend a semester.
Did you ever take students into Poland before the fall of the Iron Curtain?
No, I was not in. We spent a year living there before the fall.
Okay,
and also,
that's what I'm thinking of then.
A half year living in Kyiv before the fall. But Mike Ham, a retired history professor and a Russian specialist, for a center term, it used to be 6 weeks, would regularly take students under the communists to Moscow, Leningrad, and usually one East European country, sometimes Krakow or whatever, Kazakhstan.
So why were you living in Poland then?
I was a government professor, Fulbright professor, in American culture.
Was this before you came to Center?
No, after Center.
Okay.
For 1 year. And we left, and we had, our kids with us. Girls were 11 and John was 5. We lived in Warsaw, and were followed by the Polish KGB. Our phone was tapped. But after a while, they realized we probably weren't going to disrupt the communist system. We tried in subtle ways. I mean, like, what did I teach? I taught Emerson, self-reliance and stuff like that, And so we had a difficult but wonderful year. And then in Kyiv, we had an easier year, although our 11-year-old son would rather have been in Beit Junior High School. So the first half was troubling, but the second half, he was a rock star at his Russian school. And at that point, Russian was the language in Kyiv. Although the folks we knew had good English, and they were rabidly anti-Russian. So it's not surprising to us how well they have fought the Ruskies.
Do you keep in touch with any of those folks?
Yes. Our closest friends immigrated to Toronto, and they come to Kentucky a lot. He taught in the Governor's Scholars Program in the summer. I taught one class of young men who are going to be military interpreters. They would now be about 50, and all of the we've lost touch with. All of those would be on the front lines. And so when we see pictures, we keep looking. We lived in a hotel there, and it was right in the center of Kyiv. We haven't yet seen pictures of it. It perhaps wasn't bombed by the Russians, but much of the outskirts of Kyiv was burned or bombed, So it's absolutely tragic, and it's been a slow burn for me ever since the invasion.
I can imagine. And when were you there, like in the late 70s, early 80s?
We were there in 87. When we left Warsaw in July of 80. In August, Lech Wałęsa climbed over the fence and started Solidarność that brought down the communists. We left Kyiv in December of 87. Well, 89, the wall came down. And there's a kind of an urban legend with students that I caused both of those things.
Just totally coincidental that you were there and then vast cultural changes happened.
Yeah.
Well, I'll have my support staff look into that and see if we can confirm or verify any of that information. All right, Milton, I asked you to be on the podcast. This is the third time I have done a summer reading episode, and previously I had Dr. Lee Jefferson from Center. Last year I had Dr. John Kincaid. I can't imagine a better fit for this, and you have come literally with a stack. So I'm looking forward to hearing your recommendations for what folks can read this summer.
Well, have you been watching these long Netflix series that go on for 6 or 7 years, like A Place to Call Home, the Australian one, or things like that, Offspring?
I've watched the F1 docuseries.
Okay. Well, the problem with the long series, and Place to Call Home is the best thing on. It's Australian. It's a combination of Downton Abbey and Dallas. But it's absolutely addictive. In fact, there's 70 episodes, and we recommend it to Ray and Cindy Hammond. They watched the whole 70 in 1 week. They get up in the morning and just watch them. But the problem with those is, things happen between, and so it's hard to keep up. We just finished The Lincoln Lawyer, which I doze a little bit late at night. We watch it in the evenings late. And I couldn't keep up. And so I like little short things that are just kind of a movie or 1 or 2 episodes. The same for summer reading. And so I thought we'd start with some summer reading you can pick up at any time and you don't have to remember what happened before.
Sounds perfect.
And I want to focus on poetry, modern poetry, that is not written only to confuse academics. But the kind of Billy Collins stuff, you can read a little bit and it's language, but language as is spoken, but language that's spoken more perfectly than we speak it. It's more intense, it's more poetic, but it's also clear. And actually, I want to start with a Danville poet, Morris Manning, whom I know you know.
I do.
Good friend of yours. And
he's on my short list for guests in the future, too.
Well, he's the best, and I see him, and I think others do, as the next Wendell Berry. In fact, he's a protege of Wendell, okay? And I love his stuff, and I'm going to read just a little snatch of it. All of his stuff is readable, okay? It's not meant to be studied and figured out. This is from his book, Bucolics, and it's a series of short poems that he basically wrote about God. God is called Boss, okay? And this is number 23. Now, what I'll do, because you're not looking at the page where there's a break between lines, I'll pause slightly between that. Listen to the voice he has. Did you pull yourself up by your bootstraps, boss? Did you live pillar to post for years upon years? Did you make do with what you had, however little it might have been? A pinch of salt between your fingers, a pouch of nothing tied to a stick? Did you tote that stick across your shoulder? Oh, I'd swear you did. You had a humble raising up. This is to Boss, God. Hey, Boss. A humble raising up, just like the moon a little, at a time, a little bit, but that's all I need from you. I only need a pinch of what you got besides. That's all you'd ever give me. And it goes on. He writes a lot about Lincoln in this book, Rail Splitter. And these are great poems. By the way, you can use a lot of his poems if you want to have a kind of beginning to a meal and you don't like the traditional graces. You can use a lot of his poems or of Georgella Lyon's poems. She's a poet laureate from Harlan, grew up, came to Center and lives in Lexington. But this is his book about Lincoln, and a lot of it is in the voice of Lincoln. This happens to be in the voice of Lincoln after he died. Okay, now listen to how this sounds like the best of spoken English. And again, I'll pause between the lines. This is Lincoln speaking after he died. If the actor hadn't shot me, I might have lived, like Whitman and Melville, for most of my century, the first president, American-born and not from a state that had ever been a colony, the new America, settled ahead of law and reason by those who believed sincerely in the promise, whose design implied the promise, and those who took it for granted or took it for themselves, driven by greed and necessity. Okay, that's just part of that one. This is, this is called Learning to Write with a Feather. Morris Manning, but in the voice of Lincoln after he died. The claim my cousin offered after I died, that he'd killed a buzzard for a single feather in order to bend my fingers around the quill that I might learn the shapes of letters, is true. How strange that I could read most anything and grasp it if I read it twice aloud. I could recall it ever after, word for word. There's a divinity that shapes our ends. A line from Hamlet I used to savor because it sounds just right, yet the meaning bounds away as the mind, desiring comprehension, advances. And all of this before I could write my name. For what was printed differed from what was written. It didn't occur to me in early years after, and so forth. So you see how readable this stuff is. And you can sit down late at night or sometime and just kind of open it. I'll end with, one is an Irish poet.
Great.
Who just died, Paul Muldoon, one of my favorite Irish. Seamus Heaney died, 2 years ago, and Paul Muldoon died. And there's a center connection with Muldoon, but I won't go into it here.
And this is from what book, Paul Muldoon's?
It's called Moy, Sand, and Gravel, Paul Muldoon. The connection is he would live in the center apartment that we've lived in a couple of times, that John Kincaid has now lived in, John and Nikki and Charlie, that Jeff Feeberg has lived in. It's one that center professors rent in the spring. And both times we were there, he had preceded us, and so we'd get his letters. Paul Muldoon coming to where we lived. It was amazing, like Whitman showing up at the door or something. But he's like Morris Manning in that the stuff is readable. Okay, this is called Famous First Words, and it's a series of famous first words, and I'll just read a few of them. John Ford's first words were, "May I please have a cigar?" Ulysses S. Grant's first word was water. A general needs water. Washington Irving's first words were, "When will this end?" James Joyce's first words were, "Does nobody understand?" St. Lawrence's first words were, "This side is roasted enough." He was roasted. And it goes on. It's just fun. A couple more. Gertrude Stein's first words were, "In that case, what is the question?" Henry David Thoreau's first words were, "Moose, Indian." Emily Zola's first words were, "It must be something we've eaten." And finally, another Kentucky poet who has been in Danville a lot, Richard Taylor. He now teaches with Morris at Trancey. Okay. He was at KSU for years and years. And he writes, really great poets also write prose, I think. Okay. And he's written novels. But this is a book published by Gray Zeitz. This is Larkspur Press, a handset press up in Monterey, a kind of artist colony up near Owen County. I guess it's in Owen County. And this was
Monterey, Kentucky, not California.
Monterey, Kentucky, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. This is perhaps named after Monterey, which is also an artist colony. I don't know.
Or maybe Monterey out there is named after ours.
Probably not, but whatever. So these are 4 poet laureates: Jane Gentry, Joe Servant, Richard Taylor, and Sina Neslin. Sina Neslin is in Louisville, and she shocked the Melville world with her novel called Ahab's First Wife. Anyway, forget that. We won't do Melville today.
That's a whole other episode, Milton.
But this is a series of poems on Lincoln. Okay, handset on the press, and again, Richard Taylor is like Morris Manning. It's easy to read. It's language, English as it's spoken, but in a purer form. And this is an outside person talking about Lincoln. And it's called A Man Without a Church. And it's a sonnet so it's an iambic pentameter, but you're not too aware of that. The form doesn't squish the meaning. Belonging to no church except his conscience, Lincoln, a suspected deist, kept his own counsel with God. Stump rivals said no Christian ought to go for him, especially Peter Cartwright, a circuit-riding Methodist who wanted the seat himself and whispered infidelity. Responding, Lincoln drafted a handbill, claiming he followed, quote, a doctrine of necessity, our minds impelled to action or checked by some power mind could not control, some brand of fatalism. When he nervily took a back pew in Cartwright's church after a day of stumping, candidate Cartwright challenged him to say, where was he going, if not to heaven, if not to hell? To Congress, Lincoln said, and did. Isn't that good? They're all like that.
And what's the name of that one?
This is called Abraham Lincoln of Kentucky, and the name of the poem I just read is The Doctrine of Necessity. Okay?
Excellent.
The sonnet. These kind of books you can get at Carmichael's in Louisville, or probably in Joe Beth. They probably will have it. This is published it's a wonderfully handsome little...
It's a beautiful book to see.
Oh, yeah. And again, each letter was hand set. I wanted to see how many copies. I can't see it now. They're limited copies for $24. Okay? So, where do you want to go from here?
You lead the way. Mostly fiction there? Or you've got a little bit of everything.
A little of everything. Let's stay to Kentucky and go to Ed McClanahan, who just died. Well, died, 6 months ago or so. McClanahan, as some of you know, is, again, a friend of Wendell Berry. When McClanahan came back to Kentucky, California, he lived in Port Royal. Wendell Berry let him rent a house they owned. And this has been in about like 82 or something. And Mark Lucas, who teaches English, a colleague of Kincaid's and mine, went up and did an interview with him, a video interview. And we took two students with us, and one of them was a guy named Tom Thurman. Tom Thurman makes documentaries for KET. He did the basketball one. He does all of them.
Did the one on, I can't remember his name, but did the Queen's Gambit, wrote the Queen's Gambit.
He did one on the author of the Queen's Gambit, whose name escapes me also. And so that was his first, we got him started, we like to say. He kind of laughs. But Ed McClanahan, he wrote one incredibly good, funny novel about Kentucky. It's called The Natural Man, and I used to regularly teach that in American fiction. And one time I taught it, and I had him come down, and it was outside class, and I was mouthing away about the book, and he was sitting there looking like a bum. He kind of looked like a bum a lot. He was a hippie, aging hippie. And he got up and said, "You don't know what you're talking about, mister." And we got in a fight that almost was of course, the students didn't know that was he. And so at the end I said, "How do you know it, Big Pants?" And he said, "'Cause I wrote it. I'm Ed McClanahan." And when I see students today, they still talk about that. But that is so funny. Gosh, it's funny. He then wrote a series of other books based on his time in California. He was there with as a Stegner Fellow with a lot of Kentucky writers, Wendell Berry among them. And he was on the bus, the Mary Prankster bus, back when LSD was being kind of experimented with. And this book is a fairly recent one before he died, called Mostly True Stories, Not Even Immortality Lasts Forever. Okay.
Is it a novel or a collection of short stories?
It's a collection of semi-autobiographical incidents, okay? Some are almost entirely fictional, and some are not.
Now, this is a family-friendly show, Milton. Don't read anything too.
Oh, I won't. No, it's not. This is a little essay called Ken Kesey and His Cosmic Convergence Machine. This gives you a sense of what it's like. In mid-November of 1961, when I was an instructor in the English department at Oregon State University in Corvallis, I got a note from a friend and fellow Kentuckian, James Baker Hall, who'd been in Wallace Stegner's creative writing program at Stanford with Ken Kesey the preceding year. Kesey, Jim said, was about to publish his first novel, which turned out to be One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and had returned to his native Oregon to begin another one. You must go down to Springfield, Jim urged, and meet this gregarious young genius. Okay, that's the kind of intro to all of these essays, so they're all sort of semi-autobiographical about his life.
During a very interesting period in American history.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Okay, now let's go to Carrickfergus. Carrickfergus is a sister city where Max is going to be an exchange student very soon. And this writer, I learned about this writer, or Sandy, my wife, did, from Eric Drake. Eric Drake is a fantastic physical therapist, but a game expert and a reader. And he knew that we had a sister city, and I hadn't known about this writer. And he told Sandy, and it turns out our library, public library, has a lot of his books, and a lot of his books you can listen to on tape, if you have a CD. His name is Benjamin Black. No, his real name is John Banville. Rhymes with Danville, but with a B. John Banville. But he also writes under the pseudonym, or used to, Benjamin Black. Okay. And it's kind of a gritty detective stuff set typically during the Troubles in Northern Ireland, and particularly in Carrickfergus and Belfast. And the detective who becomes the protagonist really is called Quirk. Okay, Quirk. That says something about him. He's got a couple of them, but that's the main one. And if you like, and these are, detective stories, but they're really good. And they are filled with the details of living in Carrickfergus during the Troubles and then afterwards, or in Belfast. So if you go to Northern Ireland, I would really recommend.
And Carrickfergus is just up the road from Belfast.
10 miles, yeah. And there's a new coast highway. You can get there in 10 minutes if you go to the speed limit. It used to be at the wind around. So those are in the public library. I cannot not mention my favorite author who was living until fairly recently. I guess it's been 2 years. And that's John le Carré. Okay, John le Carré, who invented the spy novel with the cold. The spy who came in.
The spy who came in from the cold. Did he do Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy? Maybe
he's done probably now about 30 novels. And what's really interesting is he was in MI5 a little bit like Ian Fleming, who wrote the James Bond. In fact, we just watched a film about MI5, MI6 in 1943. It's called the Mincemeat Operation. And it's a famous operation.
That's on Netflix.
Netflix, yes. And Ian Fleming is in that because he was. It's fictional, but it's pretty biographical of that incredible deception. Okay. And Ian Fleming is part of that film. Well, le Carré was with MI6 just a little bit, but then wrote the great. He's kind of the Henry James of spy fiction. That is, he's brilliantly, a bit complicated, I love his style. And I've collected his books, and he didn't sign books when he was alive. I once spent a long time. I knew he had a house in Cornwall, but also he lived, when he was in London, in Hampstead. And so I thought I'd track down which kind of pub he hung out, and I went to it, and I thought I recognized him. I'd seen his picture, and went up and spoke to him. And, of course, it was not Le Carré. He tried to have me arrested, but I was not. But after a trip to England, and one of the people on the trip somehow got a signed copy of this novel. So this is, if there's a fire in the house, I'm going to take two things first. One, the glass apple that Stephen Powell blew for us, and second, this Le Carré book,
which is Absolute Friends.
Yeah, but what I love about Le Carré, he has Henry James's psychological insights, and as you know, modern psychology was invented by James, although it was his brother William James. Henry invented the novel, and that's not bad. And the sister, Alice James, invented modern poetry. So of the 5 James kids, one invented modern poetry, one invented the modern novel, and the other invented the science or pseudoscience of psychology. That's pretty good.
It's 3 out of 5. That's pretty good.
Yeah, the father, who had gotten a lot of money, but he didn't spend it. He spent it on his kids, and his whole philosophy of education was, you don't want any child to be over-influenced by one person, and so he just kept moving them around, and he had enough money. It was largely in Europe. So all the kids had this really kind of weird education, just moving from city to city, and he'd take them to art galleries, and they'd have a professor or something.
All right, if you were going to pick one Jean Le Carré novel to start with, or your favorite, is that it?
This might be it. I would pick something later.
Okay.
Why he's so great to read endlessly is after the Cold War ended, he kept writing once every year or two, and every fall, when it would come out late fall, and Sandy would get that as a Christmas gift, and I would not open it. And so for the week after Christmas, I would indulge, and I would read it. And what he does is he changes the subject to keep up with the times. This is a pretty good one to start with, Absolute Friends. I'll read the first sentence or two just to give you an idea. And again, it's complicated enough that you have to pay some attention, but the language is so gorgeous. On the day his destiny returned to claim him, Ted Mundy was sporting a bowler hat and balancing on a soapbox in one of Mad King Ludwig's castles in Bavaria. It wasn't a classic bowler, more your Laurel and Hardy's than Savile Row. It wasn't an English hat, despite the Union Jack blazoned in Oriental sink on the handkerchief pocket of his elderly tweed jacket. Okay. And so he continues the world of spying and intrigue and counterintelligence and double and triple agents right up to the present. When he died, he left a manuscript that came out just last Christmas, but I don't think he has another one, so my Christmas experience is probably ended.
No.
But you can go and reread him because he's so good.
Excellent.
Okay, I'll mention, this is a play, King Charles III. And when this came out in London back maybe 10, 12 years ago, it was emblazoned on the buses, as advertising, and that was taken down because the premise of the play, it was at the Wyndham Theater right by Leicester Square, was that Queen Elizabeth has died and Charles ascends to the throne. Okay, Charles and Camilla. And the Lady Macbeth of this play is actually Kate. And Kate arranges things so that Charles goofs up. and that's easy to see. He refuses to sign something passed by Parliament, which he is required to do, and so he is deposed, and William becomes King Charles. King Charles III is of course Prince Charles, who becomes king, but he is deposed very quickly, and William and Kate take over. Harry is kind of a motorcycle rider guy at the time. It's a wonderful play. It came to Broadway and didn't last too long. But the reason it's a wonderful play is we're sitting there, and the language is so wonderful, so gorgeous. And at some point you realize the whole thing is written in blank verse, which is iambic pentameter, basically, your basic line. And it's stunning and it's prophetic, I think, because my guess is that when the Queen dies, bless her soul, I hope she lives to be 115. As you know, she's been on the throne 70 years. Betsy Wilt just got back from her Platinum Jubilee. I hope that something like this happens. I don't want to wish ill to anybody. But let me just read you the opening speeches after the funeral of Queen Elizabeth II. And Camilla has the first speech. Now, Camilla speaks a little bit more formally than the other characters. So you can hear this. This is in blank verse. Camilla speaks. My wondrous Charles, you looked composed throughout. You did her proud, for as she would have liked. You never showed your pain, but stood instead a virtuous man of dignity and grace, immovable, inscrutable as stone. And Charles replies, Please don't. It's simply what I had to do. We'll find no dignity in covering up the way we feel. What son should, standing waiting at his mother's grave, stop his tears, and so forth. The whole thing, and so it to hear it spoken by actors is wonderful. And you know that it's even better than the regular dialogue because it's in basically blank verse.
Has that been adapted into a TV or movie or
not that I know of?
Okay,
but I think it should. And again, it's a little bit dicey now.
A little morbid. It could be
a little morbid. Yeah. Okay. Then we go to France.
All right.
Not Quite Mastering the Art of French Living by Mark Greenside. And this is Betsy Wilt, our neighbor, first told us about this, and we loved it so much we bought it for our kids and other people. And it's not a novel. It's a kind of diary of this guy and his partner who decide to move to France. And if you've ever been in France, as I know you have, just got back from, it is so funny. It's sort of laugh out loud. He gets there. He gets in Charles de Gaulle. I'll just read a sentence or two. Let me just find. This is at the beginning. It's getting my car. My plane lands on time, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, 5 o'clock in the morning, California time. He came from California. Thanks to a mileage award, I'm flying United. Except for the food, less legroom, and smaller and harder seats that barely recline, it's almost like flying Air France. Anyway, and it's so funny. Particularly if you've ever tried to rent a car and drive from Charles de Gaulle in Paris, it's laugh out loud because it happens.
Navigating inside Charles de Gaulle is bad enough. I can't imagine driving in Paris.
The last book was also first. We learned about it you learn about books from your friends that have your taste.
I learned about that book from Eloise Campbell.
Okay. Well, there's probably a connection because of the Wilts and the Campbells, okay, or the Longeneckers now. Dreyer's English by Benjamin Dreyer. And it's a utterly correct guide to clarity and style. And he had been an editor for a long time, I think with Random House or something. But it's so fun to read. I mean, if you can make grammar fun, That's something, and this is something. And again, it's the kind of thing in the summer you can pick up for 5 minutes. You can open it at random and kind of read. I just opened this at random, and let's see what I've seen. It's about the Oxford comma. The Oxford comma is in a series, apples, oranges, and bananas. A lot of people will say apples, comma, oranges and bananas. That's a mistake. The Oxford comma, apples, comma, oranges, comma, and bananas. And you know why? There was another book on the Oxford comma alone, and it was called Eat,
Shoots, and Leaves.
Eat, Shoots, and Leaves. If you leave out the comma, eats, shoots like an elephant would eat shoots and bamboo shoots and leaves.
It's about pandas.
Pandas. Eat, shoots, and leaves.
So you could have
eat, shoots, and leave. Or with commas, that has to be, there should be 2 commas there, the Oxford comma. I would argue to the death the necessity of the Oxford comma.
I would agree.
Oh, good.
I'm also a big proponent of 2 spaces after each period.
Hey, we got something in common.
I'm older than I look, I suppose.
Yeah, well, you are, or more mature. Let me just read one thing about the Oxford comma. Whatever you like to call, he gives examples of how you really need it. Whatever you want to call it, use it. I don't want to belabor the point. Neither am I willing to negotiate. Only godless savages eschew the series comma.
I'm in complete agreement.
So what are you reading this summer, Logan?
Glad you asked. Dan Moran told David Longnecker, who told me to read Pillars of the Earth, which I loved reading before my most recent trip to England. It's about the construction of a medieval cathedral, and as you're wandering through a cathedral, it gives a little more insight into how those things got built over the construction of them was longer than the lives of the builders.
Yeah.
They were working on things that they would never see the end of.
Cologne is the famous 700 years.
Yeah. So that it's a doorstop, but I loved it. It was worth the effort. And I finally got around to reading Dune by Frank Herbert.
Yeah.
I was a big science fiction fan as a kid, and that had been on my list for 25 years or longer, and so I read that one. And then The Great Dissenter is on my stack to read about Judge Harlan, Senator alumnus.
Gotten wonderful reviews. I haven't read it.
I haven't started it yet either, but that's next up for me.
Yeah. We ought to mention something by some of the great American writers. If you want to begin, say, Henry James, let's do James and Melville. Those are my favorites. James, start with Washington Square. It was made into a film called The Heiress, and it's a Broadway play. Both the play and the film are quite wonderful. And it's very early James, but it's simple. That is, it's like Jane Austen. You don't have to worry about, missing something, and the author is not trying to trick you. It's absolutely wonderful. It's a short, fictional book set in his actually native New York. If you want to begin Melville,
and I have begun Melville multiple times. It's just finishing Melville.
Well, begin with some short things, and I would begin with Bartleby the Scrivener. The story, it's called A Story of Wall Street, and it's about a scrivener. Before copy machines, legal documents had to be copied by scriveners, writers, scribes, 4 and 5 copies of endlessly long documents. And this is a haunting story. After about 1853, when everyone had totally forgotten him and rejected him, he turned to short magazine pieces, okay? And this is one of those. Then you can go on to, this is included in a collection of short things called the Piazza Tales. He wrote them on his piazza in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, looking at Mount Greylock. So start with those. And for James, after Washington Square, you can go on to my favorite of all James' books, which is Portrait of a Lady. do not watch the Jane Campion film, the most recent film. It would have been a better film and a better James film if Jane Campion had bothered to read the damn novel. It has nothing to do with James except she steals the characters' names. I want to bring lawsuit, but I haven't.
Well,
okay.
And then you've got a favorite of mine there in your stack.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
and if you haven't read this
Moscow.
one, everybody got to read it.
Everybody got to read it. It's long, and you say, I'm not going to read a book about a guy who is confined to a hotel in Moscow for his whole life. It is the most wonderful, user-friendly book.
Smart, funny, sweet.
Funny. Yeah, absolute. This has been a delight. I'm going to go home and start reading.
Milton, I'm inspired. Thank you so much for spending some time with me today. And people tell me they listen to these things in their cars as they're going on vacation. And I'm sure after all we've been through, if you can't find something worth reading out of all we discussed, you're just not trying hard enough.
How do you do this? How would I do? I'm a troglodyte. How would I listen to one of your famous podcasts? I think I did one, but then I forgot.
You have an iPhone?
Yes.
You have a podcast app on your iPhone.
Okay.
And this will be episode 51.
50? You've done 51?
51 of these things. So you could travel cross country and take me the whole way with you. It'd just be like having me in the car on a road trip.
You know, that's half as many chapters as are in Moby Dick.
Halfway there.
Halfway there.
My own white whale.
Thank you. This has been fun.
Oh, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you, Milton. It's always good to see you, sir. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
See you. I'd like to thank Dr. Milton Reigelman for joining me today. I'll try to get links up and a list of all those books in the show notes. That was a lot of material we covered. Do you want to get in touch with me to either talk about this show or real estate? You can email me, manaboutdanville@gmail.com. You can find me on my website, manaboutdanville.com. I'm on the Instagram @ManAboutDanville. My Twitter handle is @ManDanville. Facebook page is Man About Danville, and you can also find this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts, and even on YouTube. Just about anywhere else you can find a podcast. If you have a moment, please hit the subscribe button wherever you listen, and I appreciate it if you take the time to give me a rating or review. Those are always welcome. Until next time, be well, have a good weekend, and thanks for listening.
That's it. We're out. Thanks so much for listening. We really appreciate it. Subscribe to Man About Danville wherever you access your favorite podcasts, and be sure to tell your friends about us. You've been listening to Man About Danville with Logan H. Gurman, brought to you by the Logan Company, a commercial and residential real estate brokerage for Danville and Central Kentucky. Know someone who would be a good guest? Want to be a guest yourself? Have an idea for the show? Get in touch with us. Find all our contact information on the web at ManAboutDanville.com. Thanks for joining us.